Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for giving us an hour or so of your time today. We are here to have a webinar on teaching sight reading throughout the year. My name is Giovanna Cruz, and my colleague Lee Calistad is going to do some introductions now.
Well, good to see all of you. Just to let you know who's in the room, Dr. Cruz here is my colleague, and she was hired out of her classroom in Austin, Texas, where she was the orchestra director at the Austin Public Schools. She started out her music career in Venezuela, traveled to Iowa, and then did teach orchestra in Austin for 6 years. During this time, she was using a lot of smart music with her students and having a lot of success. And Make Music thought it'd be great, and I agree that she was hired out of the classroom and has been my colleague here at Make Music for the past few years. I was also hired out of the music classroom from Mount Westonka High School after many years of teaching bands and choirs. Since I'd used Finale from the very beginning, if maybe some of you know, that was Finale 1.0, and I was using smart music with my students extensively. It was a natural transition for me to work at Make Music. At Make Music, Dr. Cruz and I prepare clinics, e-learning courses, webinars, we travel in person for training, and we also attend several state conventions each year. Today, we're really pleased to introduce you to Asa Burk, our clinician. He's another Texan, and he's currently the director of bands at Argyle High School. He earned his Master of Music Education from University of North Texas. He's a low brass specialist, emphasis on trombone. And I'm not sure if it's once or twice, but I do know that he was Teacher of the Year at Huffines Middle School. He's been on the TMEA Region Board as a middle school band chairman, and he's done a lot of clinics and camps. And then also his bands have consistently received sweepstakes and first division awards. He and his wife Alicia reside in Fort Worth. And so when someone has that background and is doing all the stuff they're talking about, it's really nice to get them in person and listen to what they have to say. So with that.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. And it's good to be here. Thanks for having us and hosting this. Glad you guys could come in. So I think the document on the screen, hopefully this is not something that you would have to encounter in a sight reading or pass this out to your band, but it's just kind of a nice opener to have that. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between sight reading and preparing something for a performance. I think most of what we do is spend our bulk of our time, the bulk of our energy preparing for some sort of contest, some sort of concert, some sort of formal performance. And some characteristics about that is this is going to be a long-term project. You're going to pass it out, and depending on how refined you want this to be, it might be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a couple of months, or even longer throughout the whole year. So that's something where there's going to be a lot of refinement that goes along with that. The other thing is that whenever you're preparing music like this, is you probably haven't, the kids that you're working with probably don't have the skills yet. You've chosen the piece to teach the skills to the kids. So you've given them some more difficult rhythms, you've given them some more difficult key signatures, you've given them some difficult textures, whatever it is, but they just don't have the skills yet for that. You're using the piece to teach what they need in that regard. The other thing is that you're going to do this a lot. You're going to do a lot of repetitions to acquire those skills, and you're probably going to have some side notes that go along with that, maybe some worksheets, maybe some skills that you're going to learn independently, work on this particular scale with this particular rhythm or this particular arpeggio or articulation, and then we're going to apply that into the music. So the next thing that you're going to work a lot slower. I know we have some of our first evaluations where we teach kids a tune or whatever, or our region state pieces. We'll say, okay, the first evaluation is going to be at 50% tempo. And that is, at such and such timeline and benchmark in the process. The next one may be 75% tempo. And then, of course, final will get closer to the performance tempo guidelines for that. So you're going to start out rehearsing this piece of music a lot slower. It may or may not sound like the piece of music when you have the tempo reduced so much. But eventually, once you get it worked up through the repetitions and acquire those skills, then it sounds like the piece. The last thing is that the complexity of the music is probably so difficult that you're going to need to work on this in chunks. Like let's just do the introduction. The clarinets are playing this way, the saxophones are echoing, the tubas are doing this, and so forth. And you're going to work on that. When we get to letter A, there's a whole different thing that's going on. Maybe you are handing the melody off to the trumpets, or whatever. You can explain all that. So small chunks of music is probably what you're going to be rehearsing with that. And then the last thing, and kind of the guiding principle of that, is it's going to need and require a lot higher level of polish and refinement. So once you start the rehearsals and do the reps and do, a month into it, it's going to sound a certain way. You're going to be at a certain tempo. 2 months into it, you're going to sound a certain way. You're going to be at a certain tempo, and hopefully those are better and faster. So by the time you get to the concert or the formal performance, it should be, a quality piece that you've worked on. So let's compare that to maybe just reading music. So I think reading music, first of all, I'll jump around a little bit, but whenever you're reading music, I think the benefit of this is it's going to tie into and make you a better performer, or make your kids better performers. But let's just kind of compare what the difference is. So first of all, reading music, the musician already has those skills. So when you pass out a piece of music, or you're a line out of the book, or whatever you're sight reading, the kids generally have those skills. You should be able to start at the beginning, and with a reasonable amount of success, get to the end. So they already have that. If you have to introduce, okay, here's a new key signature, here's a new time signature, there's 3 beats in this instead of 4, that's probably not something that you want to sight read. So it's going to be a lot easier than perhaps what they would perform on a concert. So it's a lot less demanding technically. They don't have to worry about, the fingers getting in the way of their musical performance and what they're going to experience that way. So you can read it at performance tempo. Once you kind of get through some guidelines and say, okay, we're going to do this, and it should sound pretty much like the performance of the piece. So they have the skills, it's the current skills that they have, and there's minimal explanation and practically no rehearsal required for sight reading. So now that's not to say that the preparation, the skill levels that you've spent with the kids the year before, the 2 years before, the 3 years before, the 7 years before doesn't lead up to this point, but just kind of as a snapshot of where they are, they need to be able to perform that with minimal explanation from you. If you do all the explaining, then you're teaching a piece of music, and that's not really what I'm talking about. I want to have the kids read or just do pure reading. And then some kind of expectations that I think we need to sort of set aside with the performance quality, what you should expect. Do you have to stop? I mean, maybe so, maybe not, but obviously not in a performance. But if it's just sight reading, hey, let's certainly try to get all the way through it. But if you have to stop, what level of success are your kids at? This time they had to stop 3 times. This time they had to stop twice. Eventually, by the time we got to the end of the year, we were able to make it all the way through without having to stop on a particular piece. I think no matter what, reading or performing, the kids need to play with great tone quality. And if they're not, then their fundamentals aren't really secure, and they're having to think too much about the mechanics and the technique of playing to really be musical. So I think tone quality is first and foremost. They need to be able to do what they're doing with that sound. And then of course the correct notes and rhythms. And if you can kind of add in phrasing with that, and any other higher level layers of music in there, I think that's great. But if you can get pretty much those ideas, tone quality first and foremost, the right notes and rhythms, and if they miss a couple of notes and rhythms, did they correct them quickly, after that? I think that's still a reasonable amount of success. And then ideas of phrasing. And most music will fall into something pretty standard, 4-bar phrase, 8-bar phrase, things like that. So maybe the younger kids are breathing with, every 2 bars, because that's just all that they can do with the technique that they have. And the older kids can extend that. So those are some kind of contrasting ideas between preparing a piece of music for a concert, formal performance, and let's just pass out something and read. So the slide that's up there now is why we should read. And I think this is kind of pure music, if you want to think of it that way. It really gives you a snapshot of what the kids are doing. So you throw it out there, and when they're playing together, and so they can get an idea of how the ensemble is functioning. So the first questions they might be asking themselves are, do I have the melody? Do I have the accompaniment? And what are my roles with that? And who has the melody? Who has the accompaniment? And how am I compared to them? And these are all the things that we want them to do whenever we perform, but we spend so much time stopping, that difficult piece of music and saying, hey, clarinets, you have the melody here. Bring out your part. Play really, really strong here. Trombones, for the love of God, please play softer. You have the accompaniment here. You don't need to bury the melody. Do you want to hear whole notes the whole time, or do you want to hear this beautiful soaring melody over here? So that's something that I think once we teach the kids and give them those relationships and ideas over time, then they just need to sort of adapt that on their own and kind of find that sound throughout the ensemble and what it is. So that leads into the next thing with their listening skills. That gives them a chance to practice and refine. And I mentioned earlier, and I'll come back to it, where sometimes you'll give them the information. Okay, this is the time signature. This is the key signature. Trombones, you actually do have the melody here, play strong. Clarinets, you are in the accompaniment here. I know that's unusual, but listen to what this sounds like. And then you play through it. You talk about that. Well, whenever you pass out a piece of music and you're reading it, let them discover that. And then as a reflection toward the end, maybe you can point that out, and maybe the kids will point that out. Hey, I was getting buried up and I normally don't have the melody and I didn't know what to do. So that's kind of an observation that the kids are making, that, hey, they're growing. Our little boys and girls are growing up. And lastly, why should you read? I think this is the biggest thing. It's accountability. It requires that the kids be musicians. They really have to do everything that we've taught them, everything that we want them to know about the music, in the music, for the music, and I just have to demonstrate that. So all the information they need is on the page. The composer has put it there, the arrangers put it there. We have to agree upon it, and I say we as the students, we have to agree upon it, orally in the ensemble. And sometimes we can explain that, but the old saying of a picture's worth 1,000 words, if they can hear it and experience it and be successful with that, adjusting, that's what we want them to do. We want them to be functioning, accountable musicians. So anyway, the question is, I've kind of already talked about that. Do I have the melody? Do I have the accompaniment? How loud do I play for balance? Can I hear those trumpets across the room? No, I can't. I probably should play a little bit softer. Okay, now I know, now that I'm playing softer and I can hear the melody, I'm dragging or I'm rushing. I'm not in the pulse. So we can kind of get the idea with that. The other thing that I think is really aware or accountable is the style of the piece. What's the style? And there's always one of those kids that maybe that little euphonium player who is playing along, and they're your first chair kid and they're really a good musician and they're playing teet 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 teet, and the kid that sits next to him that loves band, comes to all the social functions and really loves being there, but they're playing na 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 na, and they're sitting next to teet 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 teet. And if they get a chance to hear that and kind of, you're playing too long or you're playing too short, or I'm playing longer or shorter than you, if they can experience that, they can hopefully adjust on their own if they can notice those differences and hear them and grow from that. And then, of course, where's the basic pulse and tempo? Is it in the percussion section? Is it in the accompaniment section? Who's got it? Who's in charge of that? So those, I think, are some really big reasons for why you should read. Continuing on, I think this is a big one for the directors. The first the first slide was mostly for the kids, but this one's for the director. The opportunities for formative assessment for the director to reinforce, refine, enhance, adjust curriculum and lesson planning, that is huge. If you pass out a piece of music and read that, and I taught middle school for most of my career, I'm at the high school now, and there were years at the middle school where I would pass out a standard piece of music, not necessarily on the list, but it was a standard piece of music that I passed out every single year at a specific time in the year curriculum. And I always kind of was like, okay, some years I was like, we pass it out on February 1st. Some years I was like, we pass it out after we talk about dotted quarter notes or something to that effect. And what I would do with that is I would have the kids read that. And that was my benchmark. That, how did they do? Because instantly I can tell without having to pass out anything or having to collect anything. In about 3 minutes, I can tell where the kids are. And that's basically a direct reflection on me looking in the mirror saying, okay, you did not talk about this back in the fall or earlier in the year, whenever we were dealing with, holding out a dotted half note 3 counts, taking a breath and then coming in on the next measure, or however that works. But that's something that, you can look at and go, okay, I need to hit that, fill that hole in, and move on with the kids. But I would do that. So there would be some years where we would have a great class and we would have a great read. There would be some years where we'd have a weak class and we'd have a weak read. And there'd be some years where we'd have a great class and we'd have a weak read for, kind of the things that I just explained. What was it? Did I miss something? Did I not set it up well? Did I give them too little, too much information? Things like that. So it's really a chance for you to do formative assessment. And if you throw that out with your administrator in the room doing your evaluation or whatever, that's always great. Hey, we're going to do some formative assessment for me, and we sight read. Okay, moving on. So there's bonus points on your annual evaluation. Moving on, this one goes back to the kids. I think most kids, they sign up to play tunes. I mean, let's be honest. They picked an instrument because they wanted to know how to play it, and they associate playing songs with a musical instrument. That's what you hear on the radio. That's what you see on YouTube. That's what you see on TV. These musicians play songs, musicians perform. And so, running through a long exercise that's of whole notes and, taking the time to make that really good while necessary, sometimes we need to remember that kids did sign up to play tunes. So there's an inherent sense of satisfaction and enjoyment in playing all the way through a piece. I mean, so much with my group, and we're in the middle of marching season, so we are doing sections, doing, set 1 to set 4. Okay, go back and rep it. Do it again, guys. Okay, try this, try this, try this. Do it again. Set 1. All right, back top of the show. And so we don't do a whole lot of run-throughs because we're trying to do details, but the kids were giving us some feedback. And one of the feedback things that came up over and over and over was we didn't get any long run-throughs. We need to know how everything connects together. And that goes back to the idea that they signed up to play the song. They didn't sign up to play 30 measures of the song, So pacing seems faster. And, when you ask the kid or when they're sitting around the dinner table at home, hey, what'd you do in band today? Well, I sat quietly for 30 minutes while the director worked with the clarinets because they didn't know how to play their music or their part. So that's kind of a frustrating thing. But if you can play a song, everyone gets to play. The pacing seems faster. You have a lot more positive ideas, sense of accomplishment for that. So anyway, yeah, just getting to play all the way through, I think is a really valid point. And the kids, they don't know. I think we tend to be more critical of ourselves with regard to, okay, this wasn't a perfect performance. It had this many errors in it, but you know what? We played all the way through the tune. We sight read it. It was great. And you're thinking in your head, we sight read this better than the kids last year at this time, or we sight read this sooner in the year. Last year, we're behind this year, that sort of thing. So I think that benefits the kids and it also benefits the directors. So how do we go about this? The first thing we need to do is we need to begin with the end in mind. Decide on what you want the kids to be able to do. So let's just put it in the context of that performance. How do you want them to sound the performance? Well, I want them to have great tone. I want them to play all the right notes and rhythms. I want them to blend and balance with the rest of the section. I want them to play the right style of the piece and all the musical details that they go on with that. Well, we need to give them a chance to demonstrate that in small chunks. If we just do, when I say small chunks, I mean a snapshot of a chance to sight read a piece, not just the first 4 measures of this tune that we're going to rep 5 times, because by the 5th time it's practicing, it's rote. That's not reading. You're getting it in through reps. And then what skills do the kids need for that, and then develop and implement a plan. So that'll get you started on this. So putting that into an application or a practical matter is the easiest thing to start to read. That's the first question that comes up is, well, what do I need to read? My library is not very big or whatever. You would be surprised at how many resources you can locate and find when you just want to read something. So the first thing that you can do is do a rhythm line. And I'm sure every method book somewhere has a rhythm line in it, in the back, in the front, throughout, whatever. Create your own, just write them out. There's tons in Smart Music. You can even Google band rhythm line, and you'll be able to find a bunch of people that have put stuff online that you can print out. So start with that. And what I would do with this is get an idea, and I'll take you through this in a little bit, but get an idea of how much information do you want to give them? How much information do you want them to come up with on their own? So for example, a couple weeks ago, we started out and we got out my standard rhythm sheet with my group. And I said, okay, turn to this line and open it up. Okay, line 4, metronome goes on. 1, 2, ready, go. And so they located line 4, and we had a moderate amount of success on that. We had to talk about the rest. We had to talk about the musical aspects about that. But we did it sort of in past tense. And I said, okay, let's go to another line. And then we put it away. And I'm filing away in my head. We did not do dotted quarter notes. We did not do articulation great. We did not do an entrance after the rest. I'm filing all these things away in my head to refine a lesson plan and make sure that I review these skills in my daily drill or what I'm talking about later on in the week or in the month or in the lesson cycle. The next thing that's easy to do is some unison line in a method book. There's not any parts to this. Everybody has the same thing. It's a step up from the rhythm line in that you're changing notes, and likely these are recognizable tunes. They start to have the musical elements of phrases. of more complex rhythms, more complex keys, and so forth. But with everybody having the same thing, if a kid gets off track on that, it can easily jump back in. There's not a whole lot of independence that's required. So we're sort of, moving up the chain here. The next thing is that any exercise that you want to become part of your daily drill or part of your warm-ups, with kids that come into my group every year, we'll start out with a Remington, for example, and we'll do a couple of variations of Remington descending, Remington ascending, and then an advanced Remington that kind of sort of combines both of those. Well, rather than talk about it and kind of give them a heads up of what's coming up, I'll just say, okay, line 4A, and we start. And it's maybe the advanced Remington. So then we get a chance to talk about, in retrospect, because I guarantee you, if this is part of your daily drill, you're going to come back to it. We have 180 days in Texas that we go to school. And if I do that same exercise 180 times, I can talk a lot about it. I don't need to get everything about it in one day, but a little bit every day. So you can sight read something like that, and those are already out there, but the first time. Duets, those are always fun. They've got 2 parts now, and if you can find a resource that has, maybe duets arranged for the full band, where you can have maybe the trebles and the basses, or the woodwinds and the brass, or things like that, that would go great. And then easy pieces of music. And when I talk about that, when I was teaching middle school with the 6th graders, they were our beginners. The 7th and 8th graders were our mixed level classes. And of course, at high school, we've got 9, 10, 11, 12, and they're all mixed into ability-based groups. So when I say easy pieces of music, I'm talking about, for the 6th graders, it would be wherever we are in the method book, go back 3 pages, something of that level. So if you were in an essential elements book or something like that has pieces correlated to it, and you're on, the mid-level piece, go back to the beginning level piece that maybe you didn't sight read. That's something for the kids at that level. For the 7th and 8th graders, you would pull out a piece that maybe you would sight read with, that you would play with your beginners at the end of the year. So they should be able to do that, or mid-year. For the high school kids, we would pull out, the middle school tunes, or even, a lower level high school piece. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. UIL for us, for those of you guys who are not from Texas, that's our statewide body that kind of governs our contest across the state. So we have different grade levels depending on the size of the school, the age of the kids, and difficulty of level of piece of music. So we would sight read a piece of music from a previous year. Now, you know how that sounds. You've rehearsed it, and maybe you're rehearsing it later in the year, sight reading it later in the year than maybe you would. So our contest for UIL is around March, April, and maybe we would be reading this in May from a previous year or two. So maybe some of the students are familiar with the tune from a previous year, or some of the students, or none of the students would be familiar with the tune, but it would be later in the year. And the last one there, the new pop tune, the new pep tune, those are always fun because the kids have already got to latch on to a melody that's in there, and they can kind of get an idea of how that goes. And you'd be surprised that the predictability of that stuff, they get going and get in the groove of it, and they'll hang on to it. So there's some suggestions of what you can read, and I'm sure that in our libraries we have all kinds of stuff with that. So you have a tune that's too difficult to sight read. So you're working on a contest piece, and maybe you want to sight read that. Here are some tips that we use, and I try to use the idea of reading rather than layering in the teaching. Some of the stuff that we play, if it's a really long term and it's really difficult and they don't have the skills, that's just going to be difficult to sight read. So I would kind of break that down to the criteria that I list here, and we would do that. So if we're going to play a contest tune, we would obviously go at a slower tempo because we're not going to read. I mean, if they can sight read our contest tune or our concert tune at tempo, then we need to pick harder music. But go at a slower tempo and play from a letter to a letter, or play the first 8 bars. I mean, when I'll set this up, I'll say, okay, we're going to play from the beginning to letter A. Everybody got that? Beginning to letter A. Here's the information you need, and on your mark, get set, ready, go. And we play there, and it's a train wreck or however it is, but we get to letter A, we cut off. Well, I've got a choice at that point in my head. I'm kind of playing back the teachable moments that I can address right now, and I'm also filing away things that I can't teach right now, but I can introduce and I can reinforce later and layer in over time. And what exercises, when I get away from this after school or after class, after rehearsal, what exercises can I layer in to kind of address that, long term. turn on the metronome. If you have a metronome in your room, turn it on, turn it up, and there's your pulse. And so everybody can kind of agree to that. Marching band is really easy for us. So it's funny, we start everything with 8 counts on the field. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, go. And it's funny because they carry that into concert season inside whenever we're rehearsing during class, and I'll be sight reading something and I'll just turn on the Met, and I don't count it off, the Met counts it off, but they get their 8 clicks and they start their piece. So and you don't have to leave it on the whole time. You can turn it off if you want. So I maybe start the piece, and if they're going well, turn it off, and we're cruising along. If it starts to phase, then flip the Met back on. Another thing you can do is have them, what I call, do fingers first. And so maybe you're singing the part or counting the part or demonstrating the part, and they're doing it on their fingers, and you can hear the fingers clicking, and you can see what's going on in front of you for that. So the thing about that is you don't want to rehearse too much if you're actually going to sight read it, but that would be something that's just like really, really hard. Like if you had a 16th note run, for a couple of beats in the middle of a piece that's filled with rest, fairly straightforward rhythms, quarter notes, half notes, and all that. Let's do fingers first on the 16th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, now let's sight read this section containing that, so that they have a little bit of a framework to latch onto. So the biggest idea on this, if it's too difficult to sight read, you can still sight read it to some degree. Just meet the students where they are and give them whatever framework they need for success. So if you're going to do echo singing, and I do this a lot because I think music is an oral sport. It's not one of those where you can just kind of describe what a great sound is or describe what an articulation is. You kind of have to demonstrate it sometimes. But whenever you're echo singing or echo playing or listen to how this goes, you have to make them look at the music. We're doing this with our 6th graders right now. I've got a beginner tuba class, and we were playing whole notes on Fs and whole notes on E flats and whole notes on D today. And it's basically a note, a rest, a note, a rest, a note, a rest. And it's easy to memorize. There's 4 notes, 4 rests. But I make the kids look at it and track as they go across, and smart music cursors, are obviously great to do that. So, but make sure that they're looking at what you are talking about so that they make that association. Next thing that I do is we have a routine that we use for sight reading, and we read a lot, so this routine is comfortable with the kids. The idea of how much information you give, maybe at the beginning you're going to give them a lot, maybe toward the end of the year you're going to give them less, and in the middle of that, pull away, kind of wean them off of how much information you're giving them, see where they go, and then that'll tell you next time I need to give them more, next time I need to give them less, or they're ready to move on. I think we would be surprised at how well they read, if we just kind of let them be responsible for getting the information and be accountable for that. I always try to bring attention to the basics of the piece: what key, what time, what tempo, what style. And the next things that I list there: who has the melody, who has the accompaniment. Do those at the first, and then ask the kids later, without giving them that information, who had the melody, who had the accompaniment. And if the piece lends itself to where it flip-flops, it passes it around, then you get a chance to talk about, did you play the melody, clarinets, the same way that the trumpets played the melody 8 measures before you? Because that's really important. The next time you read, try to incorporate that. And of course, any challenging rhythms, like I mentioned with the 16 notes earlier, or the roadmap, the repeats, endings, DC, DS, code, etc. Speaking of that, side note, with repeats, endings, and so forth on that, when I'm teaching 6th graders, we have like instrument classes, so the kids are all playing the same instrument, and we'll use a projector at the front of the room with smart music on it usually. And we're reading a piece, and the repeat sign comes up there, or a first ending comes up there. I don't say anything, but they look up there, and they're kind of digesting this, and I hit start, and they're playing along, and it gets to the end of the piece, and half the class, 2/3 of the class will pull the horns off the face, and the cursor goes back, or the arrow points up, and it lights up those little synapses in the brain, and it's like, hey, we got something's going on here. Oh, this is a symbol. And I guarantee you, when that line finishes, all those little hands go up. It's like, hey, that thing, that right there, that means go back, or that means repeat, or whatever. And so I just, pictures worth 1,000 words. They can kind of figure that out. When you sight read, go slow. Go slow in your explanation. Go slow with the tempos. Go slow with all your expectations, because they've got to process 100 different things while they're performing the piece, and they got to do it all and adjust live. So at the beginning, if you need to, and even in the middle of the year, if you need to regroup, that's fine, no problem. But regroup, get everything back on track, and move forward. Use what you just did, use that experience as a teachable moment to launch off and get the kids more success for what you're going to encounter in the future. Always try to establish the idea that you have to keep going. And if they stop and fall apart, that's an accountability issue, and they need to be responsible for the technique on their instrument. They need to be responsible for being able to contribute to the ensemble as a musician without having to stop. And if they can't, they just need to jump back in there. So whatever you're going to do for that to be successful, for the idea of them to keep going, they have to have enough framework so that most students can find their way. If most students aren't finding the way, that should tell you the piece is too hard. Go slower, make some modifications, make some adjustments. So, but get a routine for when you sight read to do that. So next, what I would like to kind of go over quickly is what we sort of do as a timeline throughout the year. So the beginning of the year, wherever you start, if it's August, if it's Labor Day, whatever, through about October. So this for us is about the first 6 to 8 weeks, maybe almost 10 weeks of the year that we would do. So we would start with the rhythm and counting. And whatever counting system you use, have them count, have them clap. You can vary all of that with the limited quantity of lines that you have, or just keep cruising through them and just do them differently every day. So a couple times a week, do some unison lines. I mentioned count, clap, the rhythm exercises. And then we do with the 6th graders, even at the very beginning, before they can play, I'll have them sight read some rhythm exercise or some note identification exercises. And what we'll do with that, pick any line. Doesn't matter the rhythm. They don't need to understand durations of notes, but tell me what the first note is. What's the second note? What's the third note? What's the fourth note? And so forth. And as they go through the line, make them, put the metronome on 60 or whatever. You got to say the next note by then, next note by then, next note by then. Or I've done in the past, I have a whole line of, whole notes across a staff. I just did it on finale, sketched it out real quick. And okay, first line, go. And then the next kid, next line, or go down the row, and they have to do that. So there's all kinds of little games that you can do where you're sight reading and you're not even really playing the instrument. So before they can, even make sounds, but you can do that while you're doing that stuff at the beginning of the year. Saying the names of the notes in any method book line. That's easy to do. You can do that. On the method books, so if you're playing with beginners or even with the advanced kids, we don't read through all the lines most of the time. We skip some. Well, a month or so later, after you've passed that, go back a couple pages, 3, 4 pages, 5 pages. Sight read that line you skipped. See where they are. See if they can do it. The idea being that now it's easier because it's earlier in the book. They should have the skills since you've moved past it, that sort of thing. One of the cool things with smart music is you've got access to all those other method books that are on there. So everybody has a variation of, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. Everybody has a variation of Mary Had a Little Lamb, Hot Cross Buns, things like that. And you can sight read those, with or without the accompaniments. Some of them put them in 4/4, some of them put them in 2/4. Some of them may put them in cut time, but you can sight read all of those across the spectrum there. And then for the high school guys out there that are teaching, you got to read during marching band season. There's so much of the rehearsals that we do where it's not even reading music. And, once they get past the memorization of the music, they're not reading, they're not doing anything. But for Texas, for us, it's an 8-minute show. And we are working for, months on end to really perfect and get our 8-minute show up to a high level of quality. So if you think about that, August, September, October, and almost to November, depending on how good your football team is, you're not reading at all. And you don't even really look at a piece of music unless it's the Hey song, or maybe they even have that memorized. But you got to read during marching season. So find something and dig into it. So the next time of the year, this is kind of maybe transitioning out of marching season into your concert season. Maybe you do a holiday concert of some sort. Read very small sections of your winter concert music. And as I mentioned, go slower, do chunks, give a little bit more explanation than you need to perhaps, and then see how they do. Holiday tunes. Every method book has holiday tunes in it, and of every different variation of how we celebrate the holidays. Their tunes are in there. So those are always fun. Pull out some stuff out of the folder and just pass it out to everybody. So kids love to do that. Move on to the more advanced rhythm lines, and don't get hung up in getting perfected on the ones that are super basic. Don't get hung up on that. So just keep moving forward, and more advanced lines in the method book. The more that you have them read, the stronger they're going to be. So moving into the next part of the year, once you get into the next semester, do the same thing that you're doing in the year, and then maybe you can start to read solos. And of course, there's longer lines in the method books that you have access to. The solos, if you have a class solo or a section solo, you can have them sight read that, and 2 or 3 of them that are standard works, or one that's arranged for everybody. So just find stuff that they can do, and those are easy to do because there is a single line unison with the group, and you could start to demonstrate and see, okay, we're breathing every 8 counts. We sound like beginner band. We don't have 4-bar phrases yet. I need to work on that, things like that. So now we're starting to move into the season of the year where for us we have an assessment. Our UIL contest has a sight reading component to it. So that is the time of year when I start introducing the framework for that contest. And what I mean by that is we'll go over the rules and procedures, and we'll pick a piece of music that is a UIL sight reading piece of music, and we'll read that for the very first time, so that almost every kid on there is not struggling with notes and rhythms. They're not struggling with the concepts that are presented, and they're going to have success. And I'll teach and narrate throughout that process. So I'll start our timer because ours is timed, and I'll teach the piece. I'll do the general explanation where we can be kind of obtuse about what we can talk about. We can talk about the piece, but we can't be specific. And then I'll go into a summary explanation where we can be a little bit more specific about the piece, and then I'll stop my time, and I'll tell the kids what we're doing so they'll know what to expect. But that's for us to kind of prep for our contest, and I'll rehearse myself through that contest a couple of times, and I'll rehearse the kids through that as we get closer to it. Then moving on, we focus on our contest and our spring concerts and so forth. So once you get those out of the way, have fun. This is when your kids are the strongest. They've got all the curriculum that you've done for the year is kind of behind them. So you can kind of have fun and unleash the beast if you want. So just pull out crazy tunes, read tunes for your spring concert. Those are going to be pop or lighter in nature. They're not going to be as heavy and dark. So those will be a little bit easier to get through. And read a tune that you would like to do for a contest or a concert in the future, just to see where you are, see where your kids are. Maybe you can't do it with this group of kids, but you might be able to do it with another group of kids in a later year. Or if you can identify the deficiencies that the kids have on that particular piece in May, fill out your framework for what you want to do with your curriculum to start teaching that type of piece, through the fall and into the early spring, so that you could play it for contests and they could be a successful one. I always joke about this one is play a tune that you're too afraid to play for judges. There's always that piece where everybody knows how it goes. I would never play that for contests because you would get fried and really graded down for not playing it exactly how it's supposed to be. But there's no judges there. Kids will be fine with it. Then read pop tunes or whatever pep tune you're thinking about doing for next fall. So that kind of takes us through the year. And then the next couple of sections are a little bit about what we do with our contest. And I'll be brief with that. Know the rules and the format, and what you can and can't say during the general and the summary explanation times are really big, and what you can and can't do. I think those are really important. And the links on there that you see on the screen, those are all the information tidbits that you can glean from our website, and there's the link for it that's on there. They put it on there, so if you want to screenshot that or take a picture of it real quick, you can find all those links live there. And the good information that you can find on there is things in terms of that's what the web page looks like, and all those links are there, resources and forms, and this is underneath the sight reading thing. So everything's there that you do that you need to know. So I think the next slide is the tips to prepare for us. Do your homework. Start now. Figure out what you're going to do with the rules and practice. Practice for yourself. Practice with your kids. And prepare your students for the process so that they know what to expect and you know what you can get from them. And if you're both practicing this, you'll know it'll be a routine. It'll just be, okay, this is normal, as opposed to, oh my gosh, now we're going into the sight reading room and the nightmares begin and all the nervousness kicks in. But video yourself doing this and include your director explanation, and then analyze that. Just take a look at it, and what would you do as a judge? How would you grade yourself on that? Plan ahead for your warm-up. And what I meant by that was come up with something logically. Our time frame is basically 30 minutes of warm-up. You have 30 minutes to do your concert, and then 30 minutes to do your sight reading. Now, it doesn't take all that long if usually you don't have that long of a music, but some of the older and advanced groups would. So don't wear all your kids out in a warm up, beforehand, and do the little logistics of assigning parts, with the percussion and split parts and things like that beforehand, so you don't have to worry about that. On the day of, make sure you take a bottle of water. So you got to do the explanation, do that quick, and have that water with you and hydrate. I always like to go in the room before the kids. If you have an assistant or access to an assistant, have them bring the kids in. And after all, they know how to come into a room, and there's chairs set up in arcs. The kids will know what to do. They know what row they sit on. They'll be pretty easy for them to do. We don't have to monitor that. We have a 3-minute score study. Do that while the kids are coming in. The judge will get everything going. It kind of makes for a little bit more flow as opposed to having the kids sit there for the time when you do that 3 minutes. And if you have an assistant, just have them take care of all those duties for you. The biggest thing on there is you need to portray confidence to your kids. And if you've done some sight reading experiences in your band throughout the year, then this should be kind of a routine. It should be a big version. We have an option where you can ask for the long or the short version of the rules. My recommendation is ask for the short version. It's a little bit less time, and kids tend to zone out. Then we're going to talk about what the judges look for. There's a rubric. Do we have that close by, Giovanna? So this is the rubric. On the right side is the sight reading, and the left side is our concert band. So this is the technique, and these are the highest ratings that you can get for that. So if you'll notice on the left, the concert band evaluation rubric for technique superior, students consistently demonstrate manual dexterity and flexibility with only minor flaws in precision and clarity that recover quickly. Rhythmic approaches consistently, articulate approaches consistent. And then if you move over to the next side, the sight reading, the expectation is most of the pitches are correct. The missed key and accidentals are corrected quickly. They consistently demonstrate technical dexterity and flexibility and so forth. So there's some things that are the same. Making the sound on the instrument is good. If they make a wrong note because they're reading, that's okay. So know what the rubric is, and the rubric is filled with those examples of that. You can find that on the UIL website. So there's all three categories: that tone, technique, and musicianship, and that was just an example of how things lay down with that. Then there's the basic music elements: correct notes and rhythms, accurate tempos, dynamics, expressions, musical phrasings, and style. So that's what they're looking for. What the judges are not looking for is how organized or how professionally you enter the room. I think that's a reflection of what you've done throughout the year, of course, but they're not going to grade you up or down on that. And how quiet you are during the explanation. And my favorite is the second one from the bottom: how many kids are wearing white socks with their black pants? We scream and pull our hair out for that, and we make so many things, and how dare you show up. But you know what? If they played the right notes and the right rhythms with the rubric white socks, it is what it is, right? So they judge you on the performance. So some resources that you can use. I mentioned the method books throughout there. A lot of book 2s, a lot of book 3s out there, and there might even be a technique book. Past UAL sight reading tunes, and you can that link is live on the handout, which you'll find a way to get next a little bit later on. But that link lists every sight reading tune that's been done in the state of Texas, so you can kind of get an idea of what they're looking for. You probably have tons of stuff in your music library that you would not want to play for a concert, but you know what? Sight read it, pull it out. You don't have to play the whole thing. Any rhythm sheet, and one of the first thing that's listed there is a music mastery for band. That's a book, method book that we've just collaborated on with some colleagues and I. Musicmastery.org is where you can find that, but there's rhythm rockers in there, and those are sequential rhythm lines that you can work on, and they go over topics, and they present them, there. And I mentioned earlier, you can Google band rhythm sheet, and then 40 Days of Sight Reading with Marty Nelson. That is an awesome textbook for sight reading. Just little tunes and little skills that you can work on. And then Smart Music, of course, there's tons of sight reading exercises that can be assigned. Any method book, any tune in the library. I would do this with the beginners. Again, we have homogeneous classes, so that makes it really easy. But just put a tune on there, and I don't remember what it was, Alien Attack or Android Attack or something like that, or Alien Android, I don't know. But they went bonkers over that, and it was just bomb, bomb, bomb. But they loved sight reading that because they felt that sense of accomplishment. And plus the whole band is playing, it gives them a sense of what to do. Anyway, so there's a ton of resources that you guys can kind of click through and read, hopefully glean from. There you have a, QR code later on when you can stop the video and scan that, and it should be a live link, and it'll take you to a handout. So, and on the handout, the cool thing about that, the electronic copy, is those links will be live. So that's what the handout looks like. And as you scan through it, the links will be live on there, and you can just click and go to those spots and so forth. But that's kind of the outline of what I was talking about today. So very cool. So I think the biggest thing that we've kind of just take away from this that we've learned with our program is we spend a lot of time working on concerts and performances and contests, and we sort of get away from the reading aspect. And I think the ideas of reading really benefits the stuff that we do with contests and concerts, and just makes them better overall. There you go.
Yes, thank you so much, Asa. This has been wonderful information that you have shared with everybody today. And as you were sharing it, there were several questions that came in. So I think we have time for a few. Here's the first one. How has your emphasis on sight reading transferred to your rehearsals and the students' ability to learn their music? I think you kind of
I kind of mentioned that,
Yeah.
but I can elaborate just a bit. I think now I try to get the kids to be more accountable, and that's been my driving force. Is the information's on the page, and if I've done my job, due diligence of working on the skills that they need to be a musician, the information is there. That's how you can get it. Now here's how to do it, kids. And a lot of times I'll say, let's read something, and I'll maybe give them a hook to what to look for, what to listen for, but not how. And then after we get finish it, we'll talk about it. And I'll have the kids ask questions and analyze what they did. Did we do that? What did you notice about? Tell me how we could improve, or tell me what to do next time. And if we're sight reading like a piece that's too hard and we're going to the next chunk, okay, well, let's apply that right now. Or maybe 2 days from now or next week. Remember last week when let's try to do this, and there's the hook for it, and maybe they can lock that skill in.
All right, great. Here's another one. What kind of level of expressive playing are you trying to achieve when you're sight reading? Do you have a goal in mind, or to just achieve the notes and rhythms, or to play expressively as well? Is one more important than the other?
I think if you get notes and rhythms is a pretty low bar. I mean, that should be the minimum expectation, and playing expressively would be the goal. And you know your kids, and I sort of left it open-ended with that and gave everybody just a wide range of what you can do. So if your kids can play with phrase shaping, and they understand that a phrase would rise and fall, and it goes up this much, and this phrase is an antecedent phrase, and this is a consequent phrase, and they might be able to do that, on a sight read once they get into it. I think the biggest thing on phrasing for me is when to breathe, when to sustain. We were working on a chorale this morning, and a chorale that we do all the time, and I asked them to read it in a different way, to not breathe where they, not phrase where they normally phrased it. So it was kind of a sight reading element, even to a chorale that we do 4 times a day, every rehearsal. So I think expressive playing should be the goal. You know your kids. And there's always going to be a kid who can really just, sight read the snot out of a piece of music. And then some kids that are just, if you get notes and rhythms, and, well, let's be honest, if they blow in the right end of the instrument, we'll be happy with that too sometimes. Okay. So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, here's another one. You mentioned that you read a lot. How much time do you devote to sight reading?
I put it in part of my daily drill. So very quick framework for a lesson, for a rehearsal of band. And of course, this is dependent upon where we are in the season. So today was much different. We did sectionals in rehearsal with assistants and so forth, because we had another parts of the marching show to put in. But sitting on the table at the front of the room is a packet to sight read tomorrow. So we have a performance on Friday. We're going to sight read something in the daily drill tomorrow. So come in the room, get the instruments out, put everything together, sit down. Okay, we have our routine starting, couple of things, 3 to 5 minutes for that, get our pitch going, get our face going. Okay, turn over to a rhythm line, or turn over to that packet. We're going to read that. I'm not trying to perfect it and polish it up to a performance. We're just going to read. and 5-10 minutes for that. You can, whatever works best for you. If you want to spend 10-15 minutes in class, if you want to spend 5 minutes for class, if you want to do it 3 times a week, 5 times a week, once a week, whatever works. And I'm flexible about that because, with marching band, every Friday is a performance. Homecoming week, we can't sight read during homecoming because we're really too busy getting ready for a parade, getting ready for a bonfire, things like that. But when you can squeeze it in, do so. And I love the time of year where we're trying to decide on a tune for a contest, wherever, because we will read a lot. Let's read a tune. Okay, put it away. All right, let's read another tune. Put it away. And we maybe do 2 or 3 tunes throughout, a couple of weeks.
Okay, I think there's a couple more.
Okay.
Do you do any pre-test, post-test assignments where you're using sight reading?
Yes, the way that I would do the pre-test, post-test assignments would be through Smart Music and through an assignment, give and take with that. I don't really have them sight read live, like as an individual, but because just from the framework of a standpoint of time, I need to get so many other things when I'm with them live to do that. But Smart Music is set up where you can send out tunes. So, for example, before, what I've done is, this was really a cool example. When I was teaching middle school, we were reading a piece in the key of G flat. Yes, G flat. And not only that, it was French Impressionism. So we're trying to read this crazy hard piece with 6 flats in it, and we're cruising up there, playing along, but we didn't play it in class. I passed it out as a Smart Music assignment and made them do it electronically, and they had to read that at home before we even sight read it in class. So I gave them a little bit of a framework to do. So that was maybe the pre-assignment or whatever. And then the test in class to see if that worked was, okay, let's read this with middle school kids. And I recognized the tune. So what level did I need them to be at? I recognized the tune. They did not miss every single C flat. They did not miss every single G flat. It was pretty recognizable. And I'm like, okay, we can start and stop. And it was way too difficult to sight read, but I was, just kind of pushing the envelope there. So that's kind of a cool thing. Post-test, just passing out Smart Music stuff via assignments and just seeing where they are throughout the year. Some kids are better at it than others. Some kids need it reassigned, things like that. So.
Very cool. And then I think we have one last question, and then we'll be wrapping it up because it's pretty close to 5. How long did it take to develop a culture of sight reading with your group? Was there any resistance, or did your students take to it right away?
I think there's a little bit of discomfort that goes along with that, but the culture, you start slow. I mean, just put out something that's easy that they're going to be successful on. That's the key, is if they see that they're successful on it, and B, that it moves fast, I think your benefits are going to outweigh. Don't call it sight reading. Hey, let's just play this piece of music. If there's not a culture there, let's just play through this. Let's see what we can do. All right, put it away. Let's go to our tune that we're going to work on for the concert, and then come back to something. I think short bursts would be the ideas with that. But we were really lucky where I am now and where I was before. The place I was before that, it was a build-up situation. So it took us a while, took a few years to kind of get everything established and so forth. But once that was up and running, then you're good. So if you're teaching middle school, it's easy with 6th graders. They move into your 7th grade. It takes a year or so. High school maybe takes a little bit longer because you're dependent upon what you get from the middle school feeders. And then you're also dependent upon, the freshmen who become sophomores and so forth and travel through your program. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Asa. This was phenomenal.
Thank you.
I know that you've just provided lots of different strategies for people to implement sight reading in their programs.
Excellent.
Well, and thanks so much for taking us through this journey, Asa. Really appreciate it. And then for people like me that have short-term memory issues, the fact that you have the handouts, the links, I can look at the video when it comes out and everything is there. That's a home run because there's a lot to keep track of. That was a great session. And just for those of you that might want to do a little more and sort through these kind of details, if you go, we have several resources there for information. On this page, you can't really see the wording the small words, but at the top of the page, there's links to training and other parts of the program and other resources. On the next slide, we'll just show you that if you do click the link for training, we have Make Music University, and we give you free 3 levels of new smart music and of classic smart music. But the level 1 would cover the content. Level 2 would be how to do assignments and gradebook, and level 3 would be how to make my own content. And by the way, you can also go to finale.com, and there's some options there for 3 finale courses. They're very low fee to get those, and they have getting started, and then a band project, and then a choir project, all step by step. With that, thank you, Asa. Thank you, Asa. Thank you, Asa. And to my colleague, Giovanna,
Thanks, guys.
thanks for putting this together. And we'll see you down in Texas.
All right. Sounds good. Take
All
care,
right.
guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.